Have you ever had a dream, Neo, that you were so sure was real? What if you were unable to wake from that dream? How would you know the difference between the dream world and the real world?
Philosophy always needs examples, it needs illustrations. And the more lively and juicy those illustrations are, the more effectively you can get points across.
Only try to realize the truth.
What truth?
There is no spoon.
Philosophy is a very abstract subject, and it doesn't lend itself very easily to dramatic or fictional, least of all, film presentation. So it's interesting when a film succeeds in doing it.
It's very rare that you can find a movie that engages you in that and is damned entertaining at the same time.
It's this sprawling, brawling, wonderful action-adventure that works on that level so completely. What was startling to me was that the Wachowski brothers managed to cram so much that was philosophically interesting into one feature-length movie.
The Wachowski brothers are very, very concerned about piercing through the mendacity, piercing through the superficiality, not just of America, but of our own modern and postmodern society and culture.
The philosophical issues in The Matrix slapped you in the face.
And don't worry about the vase.
What vase?
That vase.
They're able to pose and set certain philosophical problems to a very broad audience.
What's really going to bake your noodle later on is, would you still have broken it if I hadn't said anything?
They've updated classic philosophical analogies like Plato's allegory of the cave and Descartes' story of the evil deceiver in ways that actually interest people.
Each character and each symbol is also sort of a hypertext of metaphor, of illusion in philosophy, in math or science, physics, biology, in computer language, and in religion.
It's a story of enlightenment. A way of looking at the world, a way of being in the world, a way of treating other people, a way of relating to authorities, a way of relating to underlings.
God damn it, Morpheus. Not everyone believes what you believe.
My beliefs do not require them to.
It's like this big thought experiment that helps us to think about things that are going to be really important in the future.
Looking at the Matrix world as it's depicted in the movies, I think leads one to this radical, revisionary metaphysics of how things could be.
It's not just about making a movie, it's about also a deep message. It's a very prophetic message, very progressive message, and still entertaining, amusing, unsettling, soothing, all the things that great art ought to be.
You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life.
I'm somebody who believes in truth, and I think that sort of everybody does in a certain sense. If you define truth loosely enough and broadly enough as the truth is whatever is really the case. Once you have that, you're left with a problem of method. How are you going to discover what is really the case? One method, traditionally, is something like revelation, where God somehow tells human beings what the truth is, and so it just gives you the answer. But then there's another method that arises around science and philosophy, which is the method that philosophers typically call critical reason. And the idea there is that human beings are going to figure out the truth for themselves.
This isn't real. What is real?
You still have to go out and do science, you still have to go out and do morals, you still have to go out and do art. Philosophy was always the coordinator of these. Philosophy always tried to stand back and say, this is how they all fit together, and this is driven out of a sense of wonder about why am I here and what's going on, and the really fundamental, deep questions that human beings ask.
A lot of people know more philosophy than they realize because philosophy is basically all around them. It's in the culture that they live and breathe.
I can't imagine anybody not being interested in philosophy because the questions are so fantastic.
How do we know what we know? Or how can we be sure that what we think we know, we do know?
How do I know that the world as it appears to me in my experience is anything like the world as it is in itself beyond my experience?
Human consciousness. What is this thing? Our subjective experience of the mind and the world. Why do we have it?
How is the mind related to the body? Do we have free will? What is causation? What's a law of nature?
Why something is right or something is wrong
The radical incongruity and mystery at the center of things, at the mystery of what is.
What it means for God to be outside of time, what it means for God to be qualitatively other than anything we experience.
Our relationship between ourselves and our behavior and the way our environment shapes or influences us.
What can I know? What should I do? And what may I hope? Or put differently, perhaps, what is real?
I'd rather spend my time thinking about that than boiling up coloured liquids in a test tube, which I don't understand anyway.
You know the question, just as I did.
What is the Matrix?
The answer is out there, Neo.
Philosophy can go deeply into ideas, but unless those ideas grab people at some level, then you're going to talk past them.
In philosophy, we use a lot of things that are called thought experiments, where we suppose these sort of hypothetical cases and then ask, what do you think given this hypothetical? In science fiction, these are like really well worked out thought experiments.
Sometimes people say the basic question in science fiction is what if? You're doing some sort of thought experiment, is another way of putting it. I'm saying, what if I change the parameters of the world thus and so?
Whenever Philip Dick was talking about an altered reality or a reality wasn't what it seemed, I mean, on the one hand, he was questioning reality, but he was also talking about a political reality. He was talking metaphorically about a lot of the things that are discussed in The Matrix.
To some extent, that led to the beginning of the cyberpunk movement in science fiction, where we're trying to write literary science fiction. We're not the first people to have tried to do that, but we were the best.
Cyberpunk, it's about the street having its own uses for high technology, people appropriating and altering technology for their own purposes, to get ahead, kind of get around the system, or for subversion.
The theme of cyberpunk is people turning into machines and machines turning into people.
There are these holes and lacunae and, these faults and flaws, and that the technologies rot, and that there are sort of technical failures, and that the PR gloss that's put out by the establishment is not really reality at all. And, if you back off a few steps, you can sort of see, a larger picture, which is, not particularly flattering.
Free your mind.
I'm a sci-fi geek, and a fantasy geek, and a comic book geek. And all of those things were present in the original Matrix, and so I immediately, I think, had the same reaction as geeks all over America. This is the ultimate geek movie.
It's like watching, I don't know, the blooming of a rare Sumatran fungus or something, to see guys who are like genuinely hip and sort of very counterculturally aware, having just a massive blow out the door style popular success.
I am not as much a fan of action films as some other people, so the first time I saw The Matrix, I was overwhelmed by the imagery and the ideas, and didn't have a very clear, coherent sense of how one should understand it.
For the first time, I was so wowed by all of the effects that it took a second viewing to actually start to think more clearly about all of the philosophical ideas that you could find in it.
The philosophical aspects, I think, weren't obvious to people at the beginning. I thought when I watched it, since I was a philosopher, I could see what they were, but it took a bit of work to see the philosophical, especially as the film progressed. And then after a while, people started to talk about those philosophical themes, and then it became a subject of philosophical discussion.
I have these memories from my life. None of them happened. What does that mean?
That the Matrix cannot tell you who you are.
But an oracle can?
That's different.
Film in some way articulates the modern myths that a culture finds relevant. This is a very savvy modern myth.
One of the dominant metaphors that runs through a lot of stories in literature and myths and religion is that we're all on a journey or some kind of a quest in life. We're trying to go from one stage to the next and figure out how to behave ethically on that journey. And the myths are just a great storehouse of knowledge about that and techniques and ways to survive on the road of life, so to speak.
What we have in the Matrix trilogy is jazz mythology. You don't have a single rigid scheme. In the mythological content of the Matrix films, the Wachowskis have introduced little elements of mythology here and there, sticking them together, which is a very rich, textured way of making a film.